What happens when entitlement meets power at 30,000 feet? A decorated CEO, a black woman at the top of her game, steps onto a flight to close the biggest deal of her life. She walks towards her first-class seat, 1A, only to find it occupied by a white woman who refuses to move. The passenger's dismissive words, "Are you sure you're in the right cabin?" "Dear," ignite a firestorm. But this isn't just a story about a stolen seat. In less than a minute, a single phone call from the CEO doesn't just get the passenger removed, it gets the entire plane grounded, unraveling a web of karma that will destroy a man's career before the jet fuel even cools. Dr. Rosalind Porter moved through the chaos of San Francisco International Airport's Terminal 3 with a practiced serenity. The cacophony of rolling suitcases, last call, boarding announcements, and crying children was a familiar soundtrack to her life. To an observer, she was the epitome of composed elegance, a tall, statuesque woman in a sharply tailored navy blue pantsuit, her hair styled in impeccable locks that cascaded over her shoulders. But beneath the calm exterior, a current of triumphant energy buzzed. Today was not just another business trip. Today was the culmination of a decade of relentless work, of battling through boardrooms where she was often the only woman and almost always the only black person. Her biotech firm, Innovate Dynamics, a company she had built from a small lab in a garage into a powerhouse of genetic research, was on the cusp of a historic merger. The flight to JFK was the final leg of the journey. In New York, she would meet Robert Gallagher, the formidable CEO of Gallagher Capital, and sign the papers that would secure her company's future and her legacy. The deal was worth north of $500 million. Her phone vibrated. A text from her assistant, Jessica. "Mr. Tiros. Gallagher's office confirmed the car will be waiting at JFK. They're all set for the 10 a.m. pre-meeting tomorrow. Good luck, Dr. Porter. You've got this." Rosalind smiled, texting back a simple, "Thank you, Jessica. See you on the other side." She was flying first class, a necessity she'd long ago accepted for these grueling cross-country flights. Her seat was 1A, the bulkhead window seat that afforded the most privacy and space. She stepped onto the plane, gave the flight attendant a warm smile, and made her way down the hushed aisle. And then she saw them. In the two seats of row 1, 1A and 1B, were a middle-aged white couple. The man, balding with a florid face, was already engrossed in a financial newspaper. The woman with a helmet of blonde, heavily hair-sprayed hair and a gaudy rhinestone-studded jacket was in her seat 1A, Rosalind's seat. The woman was loudly detailing a complaint about a hotel concierge to her husband, who grunted in response without looking up. Rosalind paused, checking her boarding pass again, just to be certain. There it was, clear as day, Dr. R. Porter, seat 1A. She approached with a polite smile. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm and pleasant. "I believe you might be in my seat." The woman whose name tag on her designer purse read Carol looked up, her eyes scanning Rosalind from her expensive shoes to her professional attire. It was a slow, dismissive appraisal. A flicker of something annoyance, perhaps disbelief, crossed her face. "I don't think so," Carol Baxter said, her tone syrupy sweet, but laced with condescension. She didn't even glance at her own ticket. "I'm quite comfortable here." Rosalind's smile didn't waver, though the practiced calm was beginning to feel like a heavy cloak. "I understand, but my boarding pass says 1A. Perhaps you could just double-check yours." She held out her pass for the woman to see. Carol glanced at it for a fraction of a second, before waving a dismissive hand, the rhinestones on her jacket catching the cabin light. "Oh, these things get mixed up all the time," she said, turning to her husband. "Tom, can you believe this?" Tom Baxter lowered his paper just enough to peer over the top. He looked at Rosalind, then at his wife, and gave a non-committal shrug. "Just tell her to find another seat, honey. The flight attendants will sort it out." Carol turned back to Rosalind, her smile tightening into a smirk. "You heard him. Just find another empty seat. I'm sure there are plenty." Then she delivered the line that made the air in the cabin crackle. "Are you sure you're in the right cabin? Dear Economy is in the back." The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It wasn't a question. It was an assertion. An assumption based on nothing but the color of Rosalind's skin. The other first-class passengers, who were settling in, suddenly found their shoes or the safety manual intensely interesting. A quiet bubble of complicity was forming around the confrontation. Rosalind's internal engine of adrenaline and triumph sputtered, replaced by a cold, familiar weight. She had faced this 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways in venture capital meetings, at scientific conferences, in high-end restaurants. It was the soft bigotry of low expectations, the casual, cutting prejudice that aimed to put her back in a box she had shattered long ago. But Dr. Rosalind Porter hadn't built a $500 million company by backing down. She drew herself up to her full height, her serene expression hardening into one of polished steel. "There are no other empty seats," she stated, her voice losing its warmth and gaining a clipped executive edge. "And my ticket for this cabin and this specific seat is perfectly valid. I'm not asking you to move. I'm telling you." Carol's jaw dropped. The feigned sweetness vanished, replaced by a mask of pure indignation. "Well, I never. The nerve. I am not moving for you." The battle lines were drawn. The stage was set, and Carol Baxter had no idea that she wasn't just picking a fight with another passenger. She was challenging a queen on her chessboard, and the entire game was about to be flipped upside down. The confrontation in row 1 had created a pocket of unnatural silence in the bustling first-class cabin. The low hum of the auxiliary power unit seemed to amplify the tension. Carol Baxter puffed up with theatrical offense, crossing her arms tightly over her rhinestone-laden jacket. "You're causing a scene," Carol hissed, her voice loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear clearly. "I was sitting here perfectly fine, bothering no one, and you come here and start making demands. It's aggressive." Tom Baxter finally folded his newspaper completely, placing it on his lap. He sized Rosalind up again, this time with a more hostile glare. "My wife is right. We got here first. You were late to board. Find another seat or talk to the flight attendant, but stop harassing us. I'm not harassing you. I am claiming what is mine." Rosalind replied, her gaze steady and unwavering. She refused to let them see an ounce of frustration. In the world she operated in, emotional control was currency. And for the record, I was not late. I boarded with my designated group. "You are in the wrong seat." At that moment, a flight attendant named Brenda, a woman who looked like she'd seen it all and was tired of most of it, bustled over. "Is there a problem here?" she asked. Her smile strained. Carol immediately seized the opportunity to play the victim. "Oh, thank goodness this woman is harassing me. She's insisting this is her seat and is being very hostile. She's trying to force me to move." Brenda looked from Carol's flustered, indignant face to Rosalind's cool, composed one. It was a classic he said, she said scenario, and Brenda's training, or perhaps her desire for the path of least resistance, kicked in. "Ma'am," she said, addressing Rosalind, "could I please see your boarding pass?" Rosalind handed it over. Brenda glanced at it, then at the seat number. "Okay, it does say 1A. "And you, ma'am?" she asked Carol. Carol huffed, rummaging in her oversized purse before pulling out her own pass. "Mine says 1C. She admitted, her voice dropping slightly, "but that's the aisle, and I prefer the window. Tom has 1B. It's a simple mistake. This lady," she gestured at Rosalind, "could just take 1C. "What's the big deal?" "We just want to get this flight in the air." Brenda's face softened with relief. "An easy solution." She turned back to Rosalind. "Ma'am, it seems there was just a little mix-up. Seat 1C is right here on the aisle. Would you mind just taking that seat so we can finish boarding and depart on time?" It was the question Rosalind had been expecting. The easy way out for everyone but her. The solution that required her to swallow the prejudice, to accept the disrespect, to validate the Baxters' boorish behavior for the convenience of the collective. And she was not going to do it. No, Rosalind said the single word, clear and final. It cut through the air with the sharpness of a scalpel. Brenda blinked, taken aback. "I'm sorry, I said no," Rosalind repeated, taking her boarding pass back from the flight attendant. "This isn't about a preference for a window or an aisle. This is about the principle of the matter. This passenger knew she was in the wrong seat. When I politely pointed it out, I was dismissed, insulted, and told I was in the wrong cabin. I paid for seat 1A. I have the ticket for seat 1A. I will be sitting in seat 1A. She then turned her gaze directly to Carol. "You will move. Now." Carol gasped, clutching her chest as if she'd been physically struck. "She's threatening me." "Brenda, did you hear that?" "She's threatening me. I'm starting to feel unsafe." Tom Baxter stood up, his bulk creating a physical barrier. "That's enough. You need to back off. My wife feels threatened. We want her removed from the flight." The situation was spiraling. Brenda, the flight attendant, was clearly out of her depth. She looked desperately between the irate couple and the immovable CEO. "Please, everyone, let's just lower our voices. There's no need for threats." "I made no threat," Rosalind stated calmly. "I made a statement of fact. She is in my seat, and she will be moving." Other passengers were now openly staring, some murmuring to each other. A man in the row behind them grumbled, "For God's sake, just take the other seat. We're all going to be late." This was the critical moment. The moment where public pressure and institutional weariness conspired to make the wronged party feel like the problem. They wanted her to be the bigger person, which was code for wanting her to absorb the disrespect quietly. But Rosalind Porter knew something none of them did. She wasn't just another passenger fighting for a seat. She was a major client of this airline. Her company, Innovate Dynamics, had an exclusive corporate travel contract with this very carrier, a multi-million-dollar account that guaranteed them preferential treatment, dedicated support, and when necessary, immediate escalation. She looked at Brenda's overwhelmed face. She looked at the Baxters' smug, entitled expressions. She looked at the other passengers who just wanted her to fold. And she realized that resolving this wasn't Brenda's job anymore. It was hers. She pulled out her sleek, top-of-the-line smartphone. The Baxters watched her smirking. "What are you going to do now?" Carol sneered. "Call the police. Tell them you want your window seat." Rosalind didn't answer. Her fingers flew across the screen, dialing a number from memory. She wasn't calling the police. She was calling her chief legal counsel. The phone connected on the second ring. "Daniel, it's Rosalind," she said, her voice dropping to a low, serious tone that commanded attention. "I'm on flight 212 SFO to JFK. "We have an issue." The Baxters exchanged a look of mocking amusement. But on the flight deck and in a corporate office miles away, a chain of events had just been set in motion that would bring the 777 to a grinding halt. As Rosalind spoke quietly but firmly into her phone, Carol Baxter rolled her eyes with dramatic flair. "Oh, here we go," she said to her husband, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "She's calling for backup, probably complaining to her friends about the mean lady who took her seat." Tom chuckled condescendingly. "Let her. It won't change anything. Brenda, are you going to handle this or not?" "Flight attendant." Brenda was now pale, caught between the airline's protocol on disruptive passengers and the sheer force of will emanating from the woman on the phone. Rosalind's demeanor had shifted entirely. She was no longer just a passenger. She was an executive in command. Daniel listened carefully. Rosalind continued ignoring the peanut gallery. "I'm invoking Section 4, Paragraph B of our corporate travel agreement with United, the clause regarding crew non-compliance and passenger safety. I have a passenger refusing to vacate my assigned seat and a crew member who is failing to enforce the carrier's own regulations. I am officially declaring this an unresolved security and service failure." On the other end of the line, Daniel, a man paid handsomely to understand the intricate details of such contracts, knew exactly what this meant. It was the nuclear option, a clause rarely if ever used. It wasn't just a complaint. It was a formal notice of breach. "I need you to contact our corporate liaison at the airline, Mark Jeffries. Inform him that the CEO of Innovate Dynamics is on flight 212 at SFO and has invoked the clause. Have him get at the head of ground operations and the captain of this flight on the phone immediately. I want this aircraft held at the gate until a corporate representative is on board to resolve this." She paused. "And Daniel, make sure they understand the potential financial and legal ramifications if they fail to act." She ended the call. The silence that followed was different. The Baxters' smugness began to curdle into confusion. The language she had used, clauses, corporate liaisons, carrier regulations, didn't fit their narrative of an overly sensitive woman making a fuss. Brenda, the flight attendant, looked terrified. She had heard enough to know this was far above her pay grade. She quickly scurried towards the front of the plane, disappearing into the galley, and likely heading for the cockpit. What was that all about? Tom asked, his blustering tone now tinged with a note of uncertainty. "What kind of nonsense were you spouting?" Rosalind didn't deign to answer him. She simply stood her ground, her posture relaxed but resolute. She had set the pieces in motion. Now she would wait for the board to react. Less than 90 seconds later, the head purser, a distinguished-looking man named Michael with silvering temples and a crisp uniform, emerged from the front. He wasn't walking. He was striding with purpose. He completely bypassed the Baxters and addressed Rosalind directly, his expression one of grave seriousness. "Dr. Porter," he asked, his voice respectful. The use of her title was the first public sign that the tide was turning. Carol's eyes widened. Tom's mouth hung slightly agape. "Yes," Rosalind replied. "I am Michael, the cabin purser. I apologize sincerely for the situation you have encountered. I have just been made aware of it by Captain O'Connell. Please allow me a moment to rectify this." He then turned to the Baxters. The friendly customer service demeanor was gone, replaced by an air of unassailable authority. "Sir, ma'am," he began, his voice hard as ice. I have both of your boarding passes here scanned from the gate. You are assigned to seats 1B and 1C. You are currently in 1A. You have been asked by a fellow passenger and by a member of my crew to move to your correct seat, and you have refused. Is that correct? Carol, flustered by the sudden shift in power, stammered. Well, she was being rude, and Michael cut her off. Is it correct that you are knowingly occupying a seat not assigned to you and have refused to vacate it? We were just... Tom started, but Michael's glare silenced him. It's a simple question. Yes or no? Tom finally mumbled. Yes. Thank you, Michael said curtly. Under the Federal Aviation Administration regulations and company policy, failure to comply with crew member instructions is a serious offense. I am now instructing you as the lead crew member on this aircraft to move to your assigned seats immediately. Carol's face turned a blotchy red. The public humiliation was beginning to sink in. Being dressed down in front of the entire first-class cabin was not part of her plan. She stood up reluctantly, grabbing her purse. Fine. There's no need to be so dramatic about it. She shuffled past Rosalind, purposefully, bumping her shoulder, and plopped into seat 1C. Tom followed his face a mask of thunderous anger. They thought it was over. They thought they had lost the battle for the seat, but that would be the end of it. They were wrong. Just as Rosalind was about to finally take her seat, the captain's voice came over the intercom. It was not the usual cheerful welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain O'Connell speaking from the flight deck. We apologize for the delay. We are currently experiencing a security issue on board that requires the attention of ground personnel. For the safety and security of all passengers, we will be holding our position at the gate. Everyone is to remain in their seats until further notice. Cabin crew, please prepare for the aircraft to be powered down. A collective groan went through the cabin. The jet bridge, which had just begun to pull away, stopped and reconnected to the aircraft door with a solid thud. The low hum of the engines spooled down into an eerie silence. The flight was officially grounded. Carol Baxter stared in disbelief, first at the cabin door, then at Rosalind. The smirk was gone, replaced by a dawning horror. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. This was about that phone call. Rosalind calmly placed her carry-on in the overhead bin above seat 1A, and finally sat down. She looked out the window, a picture of tranquility amidst the rising chaos. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't hurled an insult. She had simply used the power she had spent a lifetime building. And the consequences were only just beginning. The atmosphere inside the grounded aircraft shifted from impatient to anxious. The cabin lights flickered and then returned to full brightness as the plane reconnected to shore power. Passengers began to murmur, pulling out their phones to text loved ones about the unexpected delay. All eyes were darting between the Baxters, now stewing in their correct seats, and Rosalind, who appeared as unbothered as if she were reading a book in her own library. Carol Baxter could no longer contain her fury. She unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned across her husband into the aisle. Her voice a venomous stage whisper. "Are you happy now?" she seethed at Rosalind. "You got your precious seat. And now you've made us all late. You and your little power trip, making that ridiculous phone call. They're probably going to search the whole plane for bombs because you couldn't handle a simple misunderstanding." Rosalind turned her head slowly, her expression unreadable. Firstly, she said, her voice low and even, "Buckle your seatbelt." The captain gave an instruction for everyone to remain seated. Secondly, this is not a misunderstanding. It is a consequence. Your actions have them. Before Carol could retort, the aircraft door opened again. This time, it wasn't a late boarding passenger. 3 figures stepped into the cabin, 2 uniformed airport security officers and a man in a sharp, dark suit holding a tablet. The man in the suit was Mark Jeffries, the airline's corporate account liaison, the very man Rosalind had instructed her lawyer to contact. He was not smiling. He walked straight past row 1, his eyes briefly meeting Rosalind's, with a subtle nod of acknowledgement. He conferred quietly with Michael the purser, who pointed discreetly towards the Baxters. Mark Jeffries and the 2 officers then turned and walked back to the first row. They stopped directly in front of Tom and Carol. Mr. and Mrs. Baxter Jeffries asked, his tone devoid of any warmth. Tom grunted. "What is it now? I am Mark Jeffries, the Director of Corporate Client Relations for this airline. I've been called here to address a severe service and security incident reported on this flight. We have a statement from the cabin crew corroborated by multiple passengers that you refuse to comply with federal regulations and crew instructions, and that you verbally harassed another passenger." Carol scoffed. "She harassed us. We were the victims here." Jeffries didn't even look at her. His focus was on his tablet. "Our records also show that the passenger in question, Dr. Rosalind Porter, is the CEO of Innovate Dynamics." He paused, letting the name hang in the air for a moment. "Innovate Dynamics is one of our most valued premier corporate partners. They spend over $3 million a year on this airline. Their corporate contract gives them, and specifically, their executive leadership, certain guarantees of service and security. Guarantees which you, by your behavior, have forced us to breach." The color drained from Tom Baxter's face. The name Innovate Dynamics had struck a chord. He was a portfolio manager at a mid-level venture capital firm, and the name was everywhere in the biotech news lately. But he couldn't quite place the significance. Jeffries continued, his voice cold and clinical. "Due to your disruptive and non-compliant behavior, which has been deemed a security risk by the captain and the company, your contract of carriage with this airline is hereby terminated. For this flight and for all future flights, you are being placed on our permanent no-fly list. The officers will now escort you off the aircraft. Your luggage is already being removed from the hold." It was a corporate execution. Swift, brutal, and public. Carol's jaw worked, but no sound came out. The entire cabin was dead silent, witnessing the kind of karmic retribution usually reserved for movies. You can't do that," Tom finally sputtered, finding his voice. It was a mistake, a disagreement over a seat. "You're kicking us off the plane for that. You are being removed for refusing to follow crew instructions and creating a disturbance that the captain classified as a security threat." Jeffries corrected him. "That is more than sufficient grounds. Officers." The 2 security officers stepped forward. One stood by Carol, the other by Tom. "So, ma'am, please gather your personal belongings and come with us." The humiliation was absolute, as Carol and Tom scrambled to collect their things, their faces a mixture of rage and disbelief. A thought suddenly clicked in Tom Baxter's mind with the force of a physical blow. Innovate Dynamics, the merger. Gallagher Capital. His firm Northgate Ventures was a subsidiary of a much larger entity. That entity was Gallagher Capital, the massive biotech merger that had been the talk of his entire company for weeks, the deal his own boss had said was a make or break for their division's annual outlook, was the Innovate Dynamics deal. He looked at Rosalind again. He'd seen her picture before. Where was it? At the airport Hudson News on the cover of Forbes magazine, under the headline, The Visionary. How Rosalind Porter is redefining biotech. His blood ran cold. The woman his wife had belittled, the woman he had tried to intimidate, the woman they had just been kicked off a plane for harassing, was not just some random passenger. She was the key figure in the most important financial transaction his parent company was involved in all year. She was flying to New York to meet his ultimate boss's boss, Robert Gallagher. He felt a wave of nausea. This was no longer about a ruined vacation or being banned from an airline. This was about his career, his life. As the officer gently but firmly guided him into the aisle, Tom looked at Rosalind, his eyes wide with panic and a dawning, sickening understanding. Dr. Porter. He croaked, his voice barely a whisper. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. Rosalind met his gaze, her expression unchanged. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of forgiveness. It was a nod of finality. He had made his choice, and now the full consequences were coming for him. The walk of shame for Tom and Carol Baxter was excruciatingly slow. Every eye in the first class and business cabins followed them as they were escorted down the aisle by the unsmiling security officers. The whispers started immediately, a ripple of schadenfreude and astonishment. Carol, trying to maintain a shred of dignity, held her head high, but her burning red face betrayed her humiliation. Tom, however, looked like a man walking to the gallows. His mind was racing, replaying every condescending word, every dismissive gesture. "Are you sure you're in the right cabin, dear? Stop harassing us. She's threatening me." He had not just been rude. He had been a willing accomplice to his wife's bigotry, and he had done it to Dr. Rosalind Porter, the woman whose name was probably on a glowing prospectus sitting on his own boss's desk at that very moment. He risked a final desperate glance back at her. She had already retrieved a sleek tablet from her briefcase and was tapping away her focus entirely on her work, as if the entire drama had been a minor, now resolved inconvenience. She hadn't even given them a parting glance. To her, they were already gone. Once they were off the plane, the aircraft door was sealed. Mark Jeffries, the corporate liaison, walked back to Rosalind's seat. Dr. Porter, on behalf of the entire airline. "I want to offer my most profound apologies for what you experienced today," he said, his voice sincere. "This is not the standard of service we promise, especially to our most valued partners. We will be conducting a full internal review of the initial crew response." "Thank you, Mark," Rosalind said, looking up from her tablet. "I appreciate the swift resolution. Of course, we have already credited 100,000 miles to your corporate account as a gesture of goodwill. And please, anything you need for the duration of your flight, anything at all, you let Michael know and it will be taken care of. That's very kind. All I require now is an on-time arrival at JFK." She replied coolly. "Understood." He nodded to her and then addressed the cabin. "My apologies for the delay, everyone. We will be underway shortly." He then disappeared toward the cockpit. A moment later, Captain O'Connell's voice returned this time with its customary warmth. "Well, folks, it appears our little security issue has been resolved. We thank you for your patience. Cabin crew, please prepare for immediate departure." The engines spooled back to life with a powerful roar. As the plane finally pushed back from the gate, a sense of normalcy returned, but the lesson lingered in the air. The man in the row behind Rosalind, the one who had grumbled for her to just take the other seat, now looked thoroughly chastened. He, like everyone else, had witnessed a masterclass in wielding power with quiet precision. Meanwhile, in the terminal, the Baxters' ordeal was far from over. They were led to a sterile back office where they were met by an airline manager who impassively explained the terms of their no-fly ban and handed them paperwork for claiming their checked luggage, which was currently sitting on a baggage cart on the tarmac. Carol was in a full-blown meltdown. "This is outrageous. I'm going to sue. I'm going to post this all over social media. Everyone will know how this airline treats its customers. We have rights." Tom wasn't listening. He was frantically scrolling through his phone, his hands shaking. He pulled up his company's internal directory, then clicked on the parent company's link. He navigated to the executive leadership page for Gallagher Capital. There he was, Robert Gallagher, CEO, and right below the announcement of the pending merger with Innovate Dynamics, complete with a smiling professional photograph of its founder and CEO, Dr. Rosalind Porter. He felt the floor drop out from beneath him. "Carol." "Be quiet," he said, his voice strained. "I will not be quiet. They can't do this to us." "Carol, shut up." He finally snapped, his voice cracking with desperation. "Just shut up. You have no idea what you've just done." He sank into a hard plastic chair, putting his head in his hands. He thought about his job at Northgate Ventures. He thought about his upcoming performance review. He thought about the immense pressure from the top brass at Gallagher to ensure every aspect of their operations supported this monumental merger. His division was only peripherally involved, handling some of the market analysis, but everyone knew the Innovate Dynamics deal was Robert Gallagher's legacy project. And Tom Baxter had just allowed his wife to tell the architect of that deal that she didn't belong in first class. He hadn't just stood behind, he had actively participated in her humiliation. He imagined the story getting back to Robert Gallagher. It wouldn't just be a story about a rude passenger. It would be about a senior employee of his own company's subsidiary creating a hostile, racially charged environment for a key business partner on the eve of a $500 million deal. It was a catastrophic, career-ending failure of judgment. Up in the air, as the plane climbed towards its cruising altitude, Rosalind took a sip of the sparkling water the purser had brought her. She looked out the window at the sprawling cityscape of San Francisco shrinking below. She felt no joy in the Baxters' public removal, only a grim satisfaction that a boundary had been enforced. The incident was a distraction, an ugly but necessary detour. Now her focus was back where it belonged, on the numbers, the projections, the final talking points for her meeting with Gallagher. The real battle wasn't in row 1 of an airplane. It was in the boardrooms of New York. And she was flying into it, leaving the wreckage of one small, ugly skirmish far behind her. Or so she thought. The tendrils of that confrontation were already reaching ahead, promising to make her arrival in New York far more eventful than she could have imagined. As Flight 212 sped eastward through the night, Rosalind worked her focus absolute. She reviewed quarterly reports, annotated legal documents on her tablet, and sent a volley of encrypted emails to her team. She had compartmentalized the incident with the Baxters filing it away as resolved. She didn't know that the shockwaves from it were already moving faster than the plane she was on. Mark Jeffries, the corporate liaison, hadn't just placated a valuable client. He had initiated a standard but high-priority incident report. The report detailing the delay, the grounding, and the removal of 2 passengers for harassing a premier corporate partner was automatically flagged and escalated. Given the names involved, Dr. Rosalind Porter of Innovate Dynamics and the airline's contractual obligations, the report landed in the inbox of the airline's Vice President of Corporate Relations. The VP, seeing the name Innovate Dynamics and knowing its connection to the behemoth Gallagher Capital, made a strategic decision. He picked up the phone and made a courtesy call to the office of Robert Gallagher himself. It was a proactive move, a way to control the narrative and assure a major partner's partner that the airline took such matters with the utmost seriousness. In New York, it was early evening. Robert Gallagher, a man known for his sharp mind and even sharper temper, was in his penthouse office reviewing the final merger documents when his executive assistant patched through the call. He listened intently as the airline VP recounted the unfortunate incident at SFO. Gallagher was silent for a long moment after the VP finished. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice dangerously low. "The CEO of the company we are about to acquire was racially profiled, denied her paid-for seat, and harassed to the point where she had to invoke a corporate security clause in your contract. We resolved it decisively," Robert, the VP, assured him. "The passengers responsible were removed and have been permanently banned from the airline." "Who were they?" Gallagher asked, his tone like flint. "A couple named Tom and Carol Baxter from—" The VP paused, consulting the report. "From Palo Alto." The name struck Gallagher, but he couldn't place it. He was a man who managed a global empire. He didn't know the names of every mid-level employee in his vast network of subsidiaries. "Send me the full incident report," he commanded, and hung up. When the report arrived via email, minutes later, it included the flight manifest and the passenger details. Tom Baxter's listed employer for ticketing purposes was Northgate Ventures. Gallagher's blood turned to ice. Northgate Ventures, his company's own venture capital arm. He immediately called the head of Northgate, a man named Frank Miller. Frank Gallagher barked into the phone, dispensing with pleasantries. "Do you have a man named Tom Baxter working for you?" "Portfolio manager?" Frank, startled by the call from the big boss, quickly typed the name into his system. Yes, Mr. Gallagher, Tom Baxter. He's in our biotech analysis division, a senior manager." "Why?" "Because he just cost this airline a grounded flight and nearly jeopardized our 9-figure merger by harassing Dr. Rosalind Porter at the airport." Gallagher snarled. "I want to know everything about him, his performance, his history, everything. And I want him in my office on a video call at 7 a.m. sharp tomorrow." "Do you understand?" Frank Miller felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. 7? "Yes, Mr. Gallagher. Of course." Back at SFO, Tom and Carol Baxter had collected their luggage and were sitting in a sterile airport hotel room they'd booked at an exorbitant last-minute rate. Carol was still cycling between bouts of furious ranting and tearful self-pity, posting a heavily distorted version of events on her Facebook page. Tom was staring at the wall, the full horrifying scope of his predicament crashing down on him. Then his phone rang. The caller ID read, Frank Miller. His boss. His heart hammered against his ribs. He answered, his voice a dry whisper. "Hello, Frank." Tom Frank's voice was strained, terrified. "What the hell did you do?" The question was not an invitation to explain. It was an accusation. Tom tried to stammer out an excuse about his wife, a misunderstanding. But Frank cut him off. "Save it. I don't know what happened, and I don't care. What I do know is that I just got off the phone with Robert Gallagher. The Robert Gallagher. He wants you on a video conference at 7 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. And Tom, he sounded angry. The kind of angry I've never heard before. The line went dead. Tom dropped the phone on the bed. 7 in the morning. That was 4 a.m. for him. A pre-dawn meeting with the titan of industry, whose most important partner he had just accosted. It wasn't a meeting. It was a firing squad. He looked over at his wife, who was now tearfully reading out comments of support from her friends on social media. Hang in there, Carol, sue them for everything she read aloud. The absurdity, the sheer disconnect from their reality was staggering. His career was over. His reputation was shattered. The comfortable life he had built, the one that afforded them first-class tickets and designer handbags, was about to be obliterated because his wife wanted a window seat, and he hadn't had the spine or the decency to stand up for what was right. Karma, he realized, wasn't some mystical force. It was just cause and effect. It was the direct, logical, and brutal consequence of one's own actions delivered with the cold, hard efficiency of a corporate execution. And his was scheduled for 4 a.m. At precisely 4:00 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, the fluorescent lights of the soulless airport hotel room hummed over Tom Baxter's head. He sat hunched over his laptop, a man hollowed out by dread. He had showered and put on a dress shirt, but it was already creased, a testament to his frayed nerves. In the bed behind him, Carol slept her soft snores, a maddening counterpoint to the silent scream in his own mind. The video call connected. Robert Gallagher's face materialized on the screen, sharp and clear. He was in what appeared to be a magnificent home library, shelves of leather-bound books rising behind him. He held a delicate porcelain coffee cup, but his eyes were chips of ice. To his side in another window was Frank Miller, Tom's direct boss, whose face was a ghostly white mask of pure terror. Mr. Baxter Gallagher began. His voice was not loud, but it filled the room, a low thrum of absolute authority. I have been awake for several hours. I have read the airline's full incident report. I have read your complete employee file from Northgate. I have spoken at length with the airline's executive leadership, and I have familiarized myself with the social media posts made by your wife last night. Now I am giving you one opportunity to explain to me in your own words what possessed you to jeopardize a 9-figure deal for this company. Tom's throat was sandpaper. He opened his mouth, and the pathetic excuses he'd rehearsed tumbled out. Mr. Gallagher, sir, it was a profound misunderstanding. We'd had a long day, the stress of travel. My wife, she was confused about the seating, and she felt... Gallagher held up a hand, and Tom's words died in his throat. Stop, Gallagher commanded. Do not insult my intelligence with talk of stress and confusion. I have a team of analysts in Mumbai who work 16-hour shifts under immense pressure without making a single error that could cost us $500 million. You were on your way to what I assume was a vacation. Your stress is an indulgence I cannot afford. He leaned closer to the camera. Let's speak of facts, shall we? Fact. Your wife occupied a seat she did not pay for. Fact. When politely asked to move by the legitimate ticket holder, Dr. Porter, she refused. Fact. Your wife then made a comment suggesting Dr. Porter did not belong in the first-class cabin. A comment I can only interpret as being racially motivated. And fact you, Mr. Baxter, a senior manager at a subsidiary of my company, actively supported this behavior. You told Dr. Porter to stop harassing your wife. You stood up to intimidate her. These are not the actions of a confused man. These are the actions of an arrogant, prejudiced fool. Every word was a nail being hammered into Tom's professional coffin. Frank Miller looked like he was about to be physically ill. Mr. Gallagher. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry, Tom whispered, his facade crumbling completely. I had no idea who she was. I made a terrible, terrible mistake. And that Gallagher said, pouncing on the words is the most damning confession of all. You had no idea who she was. This reveals everything. It tells me your standard of behavior is conditional. It means you will treat people with decency only when you perceive them to be important or powerful. It tells me that your default setting is to look at a successful black woman and assume she is out of place. That is not a mistake, Mr. Baxter. That is a character flaw. It is a flaw that demonstrates a catastrophic lack of judgment, and judgment is the only real commodity we trade in. You represent a risk I would not take on a penny stock, let alone a senior role in my organization. Gallagher set his cup down with a decisive click. Frank, he said, his eyes flicking to the other window. Yes, Mr. Gallagher, Frank stammered. Mr. Baxter's employment at Northgate Ventures is terminated. This call will serve as his official notice. His access to all company systems is to be revoked within the minute. You will process his severance according to the bare minimum stipulated by California law. Furthermore, you will immediately engage an outside firm to conduct a mandatory top-to-bottom diversity, equity, and inclusion audit and training program for your entire division. I want the report on my desk in 60 days. Clearly, your house is not in order. Yes, sir. Absolutely, Mr. Gallagher. Gallagher's cold gaze returned to Tom one last time. You have not only embarrassed yourself, you have embarrassed this company. You have demonstrated that you are unfit for the responsibility you were given. In this industry, reputation is everything. Yours is now worthless, and I will personally ensure that my peers at every other respectable firm are aware of the liability you represent. Goodbye, Mr. Baxter. The screen went black. Tom stared at the blank screen for a full minute before the weight of it all crushed him. He slumped forward, his head hitting the cheap laminate desk with a dull thud. His career, his future, his entire identity erased in less than 5 minutes. The noise woke Carol. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. Tom, what's going on? It's the middle of the night. She saw his posture, the utter despair. What's wrong? Before he could answer, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She picked it up, her face lighting up. Oh, look. My post about that awful airline has over 200 likes. My friend Susan says we should sue for emotional distress. Tom lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. They fired me, Carol. Who fired you? My company. Gallagher. The man whose company is buying Dr. Porter's company. That was him on the call. He fired me. Carol's smile vanished. They can't do that. It wasn't your fault. It was a mix-up. It wasn't a mix-up. Tom finally roared, his voice raw with anguish. You stole a woman's seat, you insulted her, and I backed you up. And it turns out she's one of the most important tech CEOs in the country, and we just happened to accost her on the day she was flying to finalize a deal with my boss's boss's boss. There is no suing, Carol. There are no likes. There is nothing. It's over. Do you understand me? It is all over. The reality finally pierced through Carol's bubble of self-pity. The color drained from her face as she understood the financial abyss that had just opened up beneath them. Hours later, and a continent away, Dr. Rosalind Porter walked into the 80th floor boardroom of Gallagher Capital. The space was a testament to power, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking panorama of Central Park. Robert Gallagher stood to greet her, not with a handshake, but with a respectful nod. "Dr. Porter." "Welcome," he said. "Before we begin, I feel it is my duty to inform you that the individual responsible for the incident yesterday is no longer employed within my organization. An executive's judgment both inside and outside the office is a reflection of the company. His was found wanting. It will not be a problem again." Rosalind was momentarily taken aback by his directness, but recovered instantly. This was how power spoke, to power with clarity, and action, not effusive apologies. A company's culture is its most valuable asset, or its most dangerous liability. "Mr. Gallagher," she replied, her voice even. "I appreciate you trimming a liability." A flicker of deep respect showed in Gallagher's eyes. He saw her not as a victim he needed to console, but as a peer who understood the brutal calculus of leadership. "Then we are in agreement. Shall we build something great together?" The signing of the merger was not just a transaction, it was the formation of an alliance. The ensuing year was one of ascent for Rosalind and one of descent for the Baxters. Tom's attempts to find work were met with polite but firm rejections. The story of his firing, anonymized but recognizable, became a cautionary tale in industry newsletters about the risks of employee misconduct. They sold their sprawling Palo Alto home and moved to a small condo in a less prestigious town. One afternoon, in her new capacity as co-chair, Rosalind was mentoring a brilliant young chemical engineer, a young black woman who was presenting a groundbreaking new formula. The young woman was hesitant, downplaying her own role. "The team did most of the work," she'd said. In that moment of false humility, Rosalind saw it all again, the societal pressure to shrink, to not take up space, to not claim the seat that was rightfully earned. That evening, she set the wheels in motion. The Porter Foundation was born endowed with a significant portion of her own wealth. Its mission was precise, not just scholarships, but intensive boot camps, teaching young women of color the unwritten rules of corporate power. How to negotiate, how to handle microaggressions, how to build a network of allies, and most importantly, how to own their success without apology. She often thought back to that day on Flight 212. It was never about revenge. Revenge was a small, petty emotion. This was about restructuring. It was about ensuring that the next Dr. Porter and the one after that would find the path a little clearer, the resistance a little weaker. The incident with the Baxters had been an ugly, infuriating chapter, but it had given her a new clarity of purpose. She hadn't just grounded a single flight that day. She had dedicated herself to clearing the runway for 1,000 others to soar. That right there is a story of what happens when prejudice meets power. It wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was about a lifetime of earning respect, only to have it challenged by casual bigotry. Dr. Rosalind Porter didn't just win an argument. She demonstrated that real power isn't about being the loudest person in the room, but about knowing how to strategically and decisively protect your space and your dignity. The karma that hit Tom and Carol Baxter wasn't supernatural. It was the direct and devastating result of their own actions in a world more connected than they realized. "What do you think?" Was the response justified? Have you ever witnessed a moment of instant karma like this? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to see it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more true stories of justice, karma, and incredible life lessons. Thanks for watching.